Yes.
Yo, this is part 8 of my walkthrough for Crane, and we've just entered Dragon Rest, starting out with an interesting circular presentation here. Although there's nothing really here, it's just an empty chamber that is unusual layout. And there was probably something here, but things didn't work out, so it was like scrapped. Anyway, but in no time after that, we get to the center of the level, which is where we have towering bridged walls overlooking the river and the reservoir. Heavy use of green and green-blue here, with a variety of colors from the light sources. Fires that vary from purple to light yellow to turquoise. Although most of the textures have a gray base, the lighting template seems to have a green tint going on as well, and that is overlapped with the fog, which is also a greenish. Here's another dial puzzle, but this is a bit different because they're sort of tied to each other in that what you select for both of them as a combination affects the result of the main dial. So of course, you can just try every combination, but otherwise you have to figure out a pattern that makes sense and what the combination does. So if you set one pillar to the blank slate, then nothing happens. Yet when you set it to a single rune, with the other pillar having 3 or whatever, it'll move 3 places. So clearly it shifts by the multiple of the counts of the runes on the slates. Okay, so once you've got that down, then all there is to do after that is figure out something that makes sense for the center dial. Well, there's the glowing dragon symbol on it, so you'd figure getting the dial to point to it in some combination is what works. And it turns out, based on the notes, in addition, there's like a journal nearby. That you have to make the dial rotate 360 degrees and end up on the glowing dragon. Or I should say more than 360 degrees. Sort of a mysterious multi-step puzzle, but again, there's only 2 pillars, so it's not so bad. But perhaps it's like a mid-level difficulty relative to some of the other ones. The music is an interesting touch because the dragon temples historically seem to have an East Asian architectural inspiration, and that's reflected here, but this architecture starts with a mix of different sources and only has a few noticeable elements before it really starts getting heavy on the East Asian inspiration later on. The path you take for the quest is very linear here, even though the layout of the level is not entirely so, since, for example, there's some content down at the bottom of the waterfall, including a side quest that's sort of a premonition for what's to come later on. More and more we're getting into levels that emphasize conceptual grandness, although that has been done throughout the campaign, but we're at least, I guess, getting back into that from going through a few hallways here, I guess. Although maybe that's just my sense of it and I'm totally wrong. But we're definitely getting strong spatial comparison here, such as having to walk across the narrow bridge inside a huge temple structure in a massive cavern. And then the same thing is the case exiting towards Dragon Rest Falls and the Forbidden Gate and so on. Then coming up, there's a potential event, depending on what the player did in the past. So if the player had done the character side quests for Vizier and Solas and engaged in various dialogue with them, there's an event that occurs at the docks, but otherwise you just continue on. There's also like an event within that event, which is interesting, that if you made certain choices that favor the Unworld faction, then you'll get a dialogue, a dream basically with Zurikhan, where you can ask him a bunch of questions and stuff. There's like a semi-secret event, and then there's a secret event inside the semi-secret event, which is interesting. There's also a funny way to just quit the whole campaign by asking the sailor at the docks to get you out of there, which technically counts as an ending because, I mean, it does end, doesn't it? Blur and bloom are typically poorly used in Oldrim, and I think it doesn't have the same kind of rendering effect in Special Edition, although I'm not sure about that. But to me, this is a greater use of it because it builds anticipation towards the clarification of the elaborate facade that's presented here. One example of where to use bloom or blur.
Did you just lead us into a trap?
Who are you talking to?
The Dragonborn, obviously.
How is it obvious when you have blamed me for everything until now?
The walls are closing in. Get us out of here.
Do not be absurd. I cannot teleport through a wall.
I will find a way out.
What do you think I am doing?
This is not going well.
I see no escape.
Make one.
What are you saying now?
You know exactly what I'm saying.
If I cast a spell that powerful, I will lose too much magicka. I will hardly be able to do battle.
So you'd rather become a cat sandwich. Got it.
I see. There is no other way.
Gods, you were really pent up, weren't you?
Do you think this is funny? I have no magicka now. I can hardly feel it.
So we have to fight handicap. Well, it's better than being crushed by a giant rock.
Now, here also is where the kind of original ancient temple architecture fades into a strong East Asian-inspired architecture, starting with Dragon Rest Falls. Yet after that, it fades back into this kind of mixed, customized architecture in a seamless way, since the palette and a lot of the motifs are still retained throughout the entire journey. So this is a great example of architectural variation that doesn't break immersion, doesn't seem inorganic. Whereas if you do it incorrectly, you end up making things feel out of place. Of course, the East Asian characteristics don't stand out too strongly to make them off-putting to everything else, so that's also something to keep in mind. Alright, so here we are at the Forbidden Gate, and this puzzle is a bit mysterious and is unlike most of the other puzzles in that you're not really given a clearly interpretable presentation of the interface. Part of the puzzle is figuring out that interface. So the dialogue gives you some hints, but the primary source of the solution is a journal nearby that describes stronger hints as to how to open the gate via the bodies. So this encourages players to explore, and ideally they'd read the journal and or catch the hints that are given to them that there are 2 platforms and 2 dead bodies. So associating the pattern, you'd figure that it's an object placement puzzle, because standing on the pressure plates yourself doesn't do anything. And putting the bodies on the pressure plates is the solution. I would say this is one of the harder puzzles because you have to explore and think along the lines of riddle interpretation to figure out what to do.
You should probably get us out of here now, Solace.
Idiot. For the last time, I have expended all my energy.
Enough that we can sense it.
Chiefly among those without it. Desire to cross, yet you have no place here. This domain belongs to the rulers of the skies.
You are lofty enough that fate has placed you here. Perhaps your own pride has fated this day.
But your mere presence is an affront to our domain.
You are not worthy to taste of our food.
We have designated a circle to fight in your stead. Defeat it, and you may pass unharmed. Your victory shall be payment to Cross. Consider it a mercy.
Fight bravely, True. Perhaps if you will detain us, we shall take pity on you in your defeat.
Yes, valor shall be rewarded.
Can someone translate that? By the hiss, the thing is huge. Is that an Atronak?
So after that, we get to the Titan boss fight. This is a bit of a different boss in that it's basically a survival event. As instructed in the compendium, you have to find an opportunity to hop on his head and activate the rune. But after that, the rune explodes, so you have to rush out of there as soon as you can. Then he'll destroy the bridges to get past them and activate the same storm spell on the other side that he had been doing for you when he got there. And pretty much you do the same thing there. Now, the main mechanic here is that there's half a dozen or so ads that constantly spawn around the bridge that are storm Atronachs, which can be super annoying, especially if you're not high enough level or don't have the resistance. If you're a melee build, it's even harder and you have to use gap closers like Whirlwind Sprint if you want to get to them fast. If you're a rogue build, then obviously you just you can use stealth and everything. Well, otherwise, just avoid them as much as possible. Now, in Uldrim, it seems that Solas is unable to use spells during this time. But I think in Special Edition, it's broken and he uses spells anyway, even though he claims not to have Magicka. So in that case, you'll have 2 ranged helping you, since Vizier will use his bow, plus 1 melee for the Shadow. So that takes a load off of you, a load of weight off of you. But you still have to make it onto the next rune and fight through the constant firestorm, activate the second rune, and get out of there as well, after which you're done. So this fight is sequence-based, unlike any of the other fights. I would say this is a mid-tier fight because even though the firestorm and ads are annoying, there are various ways to avoid them, and you still have your allies, which are powerful. Again, this is assuming that you have kind of a mid-level to like mid-high level character where it's still challenging to do any of this stuff. Now, here again, if you talk to certain people or did certain things through Witchcraft Crater, you can go outside and talk to the dragons, which is just an example, another example of how dialogue decisions and what the player does throughout the campaign affect things that you would not expect to be affected. Right, so this next level is interesting because it's asymmetric, multi-layer, very winding yet relatively small, but its complexity makes it feel much larger than it is. So here there's a puzzle where you just have to match the pillar in front of the plate. The plate has an icon, the pillar has to match that icon. So just rotate the pillar so it's facing the icon with the same icon. You'll get what I mean when you see it. And then once you do that, the door at the stairs will open. Pretty simple.
remind me of my cousin's cat. Feel that too. Enough!
I believe we have to pull the levers, one at a time. There was a lever in the other hallway. Dragon Ball, you will pull the first lever, and we will follow. We will wait for your call,